All right. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Elephant in the Room podcast. We are so excited to be back with you, recording another great episode with some amazing guests that we get to introduce to you all on this platform. Ariel actually had an opportunity to meet with these two gentlemen. We're going to introduce them to you as Skinny and Bob. And you will get to hear a little bit of their background and their story. And then we will dive into actually a case. We're really excited to dive into the Shag Harbor case today. I'm excited because, frankly, I have not even done research. I have been out of pocket for a few weeks, and I'm looking forward to just learning more about this. Ariel, tell me a little bit about the guys and how you met them, and then we'll bring them up and get going.
Yeah, actually, a couple of years ago, this has nothing to do with meeting them. Sorry, the little side trail. A couple of years ago, I heard, I think it was Ryan Sprague on his podcast say that Shag Harbor was one of his personal favorite UFO cases. And ever since I heard him talk about it, I've wanted to do a deep dive and read a couple of books, but just haven't gotten around to it. So I'm super excited to learn more about this case. But yes, I met these two guys. They're twin brothers. They're awesome. I'd actually connected with Brett on Twitter. Like, I think just we would have little back and forth for a while. And then when I went to the Ozark Mountain UFO conference, I don't know who it was that reached out to the other, but we figured out we were both going to be there. And we're like, let's try to connect. And so we had some DMs, and then I think one failed attempt of meeting up. And then he told me I have a twin brother. And I was like, well, how am I going to know which one is Brett? Because Brett's the one that I've been talking with. And so at one point, my husband and I are sitting across the way, and I see obviously twin brothers coming in. And I told my husband, I'm like, I think that's them, but which one is the one that I know? And so I was like, should I wave? But if I wave to the wrong one, it was just a whole getting in my head about it. But eventually they saw me, they came over, they introduced themselves, and we had a great conversation. And I was just so impressed. We sat there chatting, and I was so impressed with their knowledge on the UFO topic, their passion for it. And I was like, we've got to get these guys on our show and learn more about them and just introduce the UFO community to them. So yeah, let's go ahead and bring them on.
Awesome. Here we go. So we have Skinny and Bob.
Hello.
Welcome, you guys. Welcome to the show. Thank you so much for your patience. One of the other things that's happened is I think we've been trying to pull this together since before August, right? Before I got COVID, and we have just hit roadblock after roadblock. And actually even today, Ariel's not feeling great, but she's powering through because we really want to hear this story. So welcome to the show.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah. Thanks for having us. Long time in the making. Krys, if you remember, I also had COVID in August, so we had it the same time. That was my second bout with it. Not really aiming for a third, but then somebody else got sick, and then it's been an adventure, but here we are, and we're super jazzed.
Yeah, and just to set the give a little more clarity on the is it Travis and Brett? Is it Skinny and Bob? So Skinny and Bob is kind of our alter egos when it comes to the phenomena. So I go by Skinny. It's my alter ego. I moonlight as Skinny, whereas Brett over here moonlights as Bob
with no cowl. Yeah, no cowls.
No cowls. Yeah. Just we're not masked, but when it comes to diving into the topic, right? We take on different personas. So
that's really cool. I like that. So tell us a little bit about your background and how you just started getting into the phenomenon, and share with us your perspectives of that coming to this place where you're willing to get out there and talk about this topic that so many of us are starting to talk about, but really historically just wasn't normal, right?
Right. I could go. I'll jump in. I think Skinny would agree. Travis would agree. Or in the early going, we really got inspired into this topic from our mother. I think we we couldn't have been, I don't know, 10, 11 years old. And our mother shared a story with us about a sighting that she had had. Fairly, I mean, it would have been in class, CE1, but it was like close proximity. Cars had pulled over, people had called into the police and reported it, kind of all the things. And I think Skinny and I were just from there enamored. I think most of the reading. So after that, for me, I just wanted to consume, right? So it was books. I did most of my like 10-year-old reading. I was reading like UFO books, right? At like 10 years old, trying to find documentaries. There weren't that many. I'm not going to age myself or date myself, but there weren't that many back then. And just kept consuming. And, at that age, you don't have a good filter for what is and is not probably good evidence. So much of what I was taking in was could be considered, like, even in our community, right, kind of fringe. But as I got older, went to school, I learned how to have like a healthy sense of skepticism, knowing that the evidence around all this stuff, at least at this point, is circumstantial. So the importance of corroborating evidence, et cetera, and kind of got, I never lost interest in it, but there was probably a lull period for me through like late high school, a little bit into college, and then really got back on the train in 2017, right? Mm-hmm. We all know the year. And it was like plugging back in, right, to the Matrix, and just all the things I remember reading and hearing about when I was younger, and engaging with Skinny here, and just re-engaging with content. Podcasts now are, of course, a thing, and were available. That was not available when I was 10 years old. Wow. So that's kind of my trajectory. I'll let Skinny jump in and kind of share his.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, the source is the same with Dear Mother. I just
love that. I'm sorry, I just have to say, as a mom who's an experiencer, like, I think about that a lot. Like, what stories am I telling? Like, what, you know what I mean? Like, how is that going to affect the future? So it's just, anyways, I'll let you go. But it just
it's interesting because Mom she was really into it, and and I think it almost seems like there's something deeper that like brings the community together, right? Because like somebody, the layman can be exposed to it and they'll be like, oh, that's really interesting, right? But it doesn't necessarily captivate everyone, right? Like and with Mom it did, and I don't know this for sure, Bob, but I have to imagine she exposed, like, Bob and I are 2 of 6. So there's a lot of us. Wow. And I have to assume she exposed all of us kids to it. But for whatever reason, he and I were the two that really kind of joined Mom at the table, the proverbial table, in terms of just being like, I mean, you guys understand, I'm sure, right? For some reason, it just speaks to you, right? And so, so we were introduced, and it's one of those things, like, sounds like, Bob, you remember the moment. I don't remember the exact moment of exposure. It just seemed like kind of like one of those things that, it's just like was always there, and was always on TV. Mom had books on the table, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, I just to kind of caboose onto that, I would say that memory is indelible for me. It's, because it's somebody you trust, obviously somebody you idolize and idealize. So when they're sharing a story like that, and even at whatever, 10, 11 years old, I can still remember the feeling of like a profound sense of awe of like the significance or enormity of that, and not really totally understanding like how that fits into the rest of like the scope of like the universe and all the things. But anytime, like, an experiencer, because I myself am not, but anytime an experiencer shares their story, I think maybe because of like my mom originally sharing that story, or just how I'm wired, or a combination of those things, there's always like a level of reverence that I give that person, because and you guys are going to know this, is even if maybe they miscited something, or well, it wasn't actually truly anomalous, it was XYZ, they believed it was, right? And there's a reverence there, respect there, and I think for every misidentified UAP that anyone could see, there's equally as many that are missed, right? It was right there and nobody noticed it, right? I mean, we're getting reports oftentimes that these things can't be seen often in visible light spectrum. So I always bring reverence. I'm super fascinated in all of it, probably more the nuts and bolts of it. We talked about that a little bit at the conference, Ariel, but it's all super fascinating, and I think it's a very layered cake, and I just love the dynamics. And until it's solved, which I'm probably more cynical than I am optimistic that we're ever going to get like a full revelation. I'll always be interested in it. I'll always talk to people. At this point, I don't care. I bring it up in my work life. Well, people will ask, like, when you start a new job, what's a fun fact about you? And I'm like, I'm really into UFOs and UAPs, and some people kind of they give you a look, and I'm like, I don't care, right? Like, and if you did all the research that I did and read all the books and did all the podcasts, talked to the people, you'd be the same place I would.
I always say the same thing. I say, whenever someone's like, really, like, I don't know about that, I'm like, it's all there for the taking. You just have to go seek it out. You have to read the books. You have to do the podcast, and then you will see. But it's not just there in your face. You're not just going to get a download, or maybe you will get a download. Maybe eventually the aliens will download it. But I mean, in general, it's there for the taking, but you have to make that step of consuming it, you know? And if they would just do that, I do think there'd be a lot more believers.
It's so interesting to me that I think that it really shows how effective the, I don't know, the psyops, or what, if you want to call it that, or whatever, the disinformation, how effective it has been over the years, because, you really, unless you do know the facts and you've studied and researched it, you are hesitant to talk about it or to share it. Actually, I'm pretty naive when it comes to that. I'll never forget, like, a couple years ago when I first heard the story in 2021. And I used to, I'm no longer working, but I used to run healthcare facilities and as an administrator. And I had put on this big, like, gala for a physician event. And I was, doing my mingling, and I walked up and I made the mistake of saying, UFOs are real. And I never forget the way the doctor looked at me. Because in my head, I kind of always had a belief from my childhood as well, because my parents had a sighting, of a light or whatever. So I had that subtle kind of background. But I remember the way he looked at me, and he was just like, thought I was crazy. And in my head, I was like, really? Like, and I didn't realize how much it has affected, how much skepticism there was. And for people in the past who have been experiencers and who couldn't share their story or their experience the way we get to, it's really an opportunity, more for like the exploration and the curiosity of it all, I think.
I agree. I think there's a saying that I kind of embrace when it comes to this topic, as well as many other topics, but it's all about embracing, like, the search and not really the certainty of anything, because we don't really know until, like, we have actual, like, bulletproof, irrefutable evidence of something. Then, well, you can't really say it's like Gary Nolan says, which I agree with him. I should. He's a lot more educated and intelligent than I am, but he's like, I don't believe in anything. I just assign probabilities. And I think that's some people might look at that as somewhat cynical, but I completely understand what he's saying.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I embrace it so much that I don't fully understand why anyone would just foo-foo this topic. Because if you do look at the probabilities, if you look at the evidence in totality, in summation, I mean, the probabilities are very high. I mean, people are like, well, I need to see an alien body or whatever. And it's like, well, how much circumstantial evidence do you need to at least know that there's something there?
Yeah.
So I'm totally with you. And it's incredibly fascinating. Every case, there's so many cases. It's nonstop. And then as soon as you peel the layer of the onion on one case, like you go to another and peel that layer. And then you're like, when is the middle of the onion? And it just keeps going.
Yeah.
Right. It's endless. Yeah.
That's such a good segue into our deep dive that we would love for you guys to share with us on this topic of Shag Harbor. So whoever's going to kick it off, give us some background about this case, and and then go for it. And I'm sure Ariel and I will have questions as we go along. But this is one of my favorite things is to break down cases. Not that we break them down, but our guests break them down. And so,
absolutely,
tell us about it, Bob.
Yeah. So I would say when it comes to every kind of, not every nation, but each country will kind of have its own, what do they call it, like version of Roswell. And I think any UFO researcher, UAP researcher who is Canadian would probably say that the Shag Harbor UFO incident is their sort of Roswell. And what I like about this case and sort of how it starts is it starts with how many cases do, which is just reported lights, right? People were seeing lights. I think mostly just like some of the town folks, they were reporting it in. This is a fishing village, I should add. So these are people who, you're on the shore, and I think just off Nova Scotia, these are folks who are used to seeing aircraft come in, and they're seeing lights that don't readily fit the description of what they're typically used to seeing. Yeah. And my understanding was, just like so many cases, is these lights were reported not just like the night of the crash, so to speak, or when the object goes down, but for preceding nights before sort of the culminating event. And so people are seeing these lights, they're being reported, and then eventually what happens is these lights is sort of siloed or isolated into a singular object, and it goes into the water. And from that point, people are calling in and then reporting that there's been a plane crash, which makes this case to me really interesting and probably a little bit more grounded, because it starts in something grounded. It starts with, well, this is what I think it is, because this is the most we talk about probabilities. Exactly. This is from a probability standpoint, this is like the most likely thing. And many people observed the object going into the water. I think it was the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, different types of civilians had seen this object go in. And so they had sent out, sorry, go ahead.
What year is this in? What time frame is this?
67, right? It's 1967. Yeah, right. I was thinking, yep.
Okay, sorry, didn't mean to interrupt. Just wanted to get.
No, I should have.
So before drones.
Yes,
very important. Yeah.
before drones, and when we talk about sort of cataloging things, and Lou Elizondo's 5-6 observables. This object these objects were demonstrating, of course, multiple of the observables, but the main one would be something transmedium, right? It goes from air to water. And so, as I understand it, a boat or I think several boats, private, were sent out into the water to find this object. And it was nowhere to be found. All they could find was like a yellow foam, which is, of course, anomalous. Like, that's not obviously like an oil slick or something like that. It's just like a yellow foam. And then it sort of breaks off from there, and then at least on the civilian side, and then picks up, of course, like many of these cases do, militarily. And yeah, so then you've got, I think it's Canadian, like Coast Guard, U.S. Navy, U.S. Coast Guard gets involved, and they're looking for this thing. And as I was like learning about this case, it really made me, it's things that make you go, is, so if it's a plane crash, right? Obviously it's not going to be some type of like airliner, right? Like, thank God, but it's not going to be some type of airliner, because like that would be readily tracked, their tracking systems, etc. So it's like, it would have to be some type of private plane. So why are you deploying all of these large and bountiful military assets to go look for what would be like the equivalent of like a Cessna or something like that? And like, there's no reporting back to the shore around like, well, this is what we're finding. Everything was very, very tight-lipped. And as sort of the case went on, it was reported sort of later that there were anomalous things that people had come out through, I think some of which was through FOIA. People had come out and said that there was some type of object in the harbor, and it was stationary, it was glowing, and the military that was deployed there to sort of observe it. I didn't uncover anything like they were trying to retrieve it. Now, I did listen to, who was it? This was, I think is that UFO podcast. It was one of the podcasts I get in rotation. No, it was actually Weaponized. No, I'm sorry. It was Need to Know with Richard Dolan. And Dolan is writing a whole book, of course, on USOs. And he brought this case up, and he had outlined that I think one of the naval assets that was sent to the scene supposedly had some type of like port or door mechanism that was large enough that was designed on the submarine to retrieve underwater objects. That's what Dolan was told. The Russians, who were always, or I'm sorry, the Soviets at that time, who were always sort of hanging out in the North Sea of the Atlantic, just outside of Canadian U.S. waters, were apparently very interested in what was going on. So full circle, going back to sort of one of the things we talked about to start the call, it's, well, the evidence would suggest that clearly something like outside of just like your garden variety Cessna had crashed, right, and went in the water. And so that's the extent and like the outline of the case in terms of like, as I understand it, and it's punctuated that community ever since. I know that Bryce Sable has spoken there. He's gone out there to speak, and again, it's like that communities. It's sort of like Roswell, New Mexico is, and there's the UFO Fest and all the things. So that's the general outline of the story.
Yeah, and what's, just to build on that a little bit, I think what's interesting about Shag Harbor, and there's a lot of interesting facets of it, but we'll call them the uninitiated. To the uninitiated, there's a lot of questions. It's like, well, these are real. Like, why does it only happen? Stuff, incidents like this happen over the U.S., right? And so this is Canadian, right? And then to build on that too, like Canada is part of the Five Eyes, and Canada is also part of NORAD, right? And so 1967 NORAD was a thing, and it's just. It gives food for thought because, whilst the general public, and I always find these kinds of incidents, there's more substance when the reaction is, oh, there's a plane crash, right? And just kind of reading into into Shag Harbor has undertones of the Kecksburg incident, right? Where everybody originally thought, it was some kind of aircraft that crashed, right? And it wasn't, it was almost like as it went on, and the military's response, right, and moving to the area, looking, Bob, you might have some more detail here, but I'm pretty sure there was for lack of a better term, like a perimeter setup, right? But out over the open water, right? And so I find those truths to be just to give Shag Harbor a little bit more juice, if you will, than your typical. Not that any mass UFO incident is prosaic, but it's just those are highlights. Yeah.
Right. No, that's really important. I think what was happening around this time, I'm really bad with my history. So was there anything going on? Obviously, Vietnam was going on during this time, right? I'm just trying to think of like what type of military events were happening.
Yeah. Well, I think you're in the sort of meat and potatoes, heart and soul bullseye of the Cold War, right? The tensions between former Soviet Republic and NATO, Canada, United States, of which of course we're part of NATO, and you're really starting to at that time as well in terms of like, because of the Cold War, as well as just advancements in technology, you're able to recruit more satellite technology to track, space and aerospace objects. The capabilities to detect submarines moving in and out of, naval space, if you will, is advancing as well. So this isn't, again, like a case of like a Roswell where these things didn't exist. They certainly would have had the capabilities to, both the Soviets as well as NATO had the capabilities to track any object coming in from outside the atmosphere, moving through the atmosphere, and then going into, of course, like the water, and then the detection with sonar, of course, assuming that the objects were not evading those detection methods. And I also know that there were reports, again, it's all circumstantial, like so much of what we deal with is, but there were reports that a second object had joined the first object with the assumption to sort of offer assistance, lend help, and that object joined the first object under the water, and then they sort of took off together after, I believe, a period of, I think it was a day. It was quite a bit of time. Then the objects took off. So it's fascinating.
One of the things that's interesting is with a lot of these cases, you do find these. I don't know what an official flap is, but these days where they're seen in multiple days before some event happens, right? Like, so it makes you like wonder if that also attracted the military. Like they had already heard rumblings of sightings, so they were kind of observing, and then when it goes down or whatever, they like kind of take action.
They were primed. Yeah, it's like they were primed. They were on guard, and I think that goes in with the satellite sonar capabilities that were emerging and proliferating at that time as well. I mean, so it certainly makes sense.
They knew something, right? Because if an airliner crashes, you know about it.
Yes.
Right? Like that and so, and I mean, I wouldn't presume to be an expert on, the behaviors of the military in terms of recovery efforts, but I don't think the military would or the Navy would sail out to this location off the shore based on word alone.
Right.
Right. Oh, the public said they saw something, et cetera, et cetera. So it's like, oh, well, we better send our ships out there. It's like, that's not really what happens. Right. So, they knew, they had to have known something. And that's why I mentioned NORAD, because I always wonder with situations like that, like we don't get front row seats to what NORAD sees. But to your point, Krys, like, was there something, ongoing for the hours or even days preceding this, right? That would have, because it's just, again, the military doesn't respond that way. They move in when there's probable cause.
Yeah.
Well, it just like, it just like the Brazil story, right? I just think like, I'm always thinking of how is it that they just are there? Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, how is it even possible? Like, I was in the Navy. We're not that efficient. I mean, I only did healthcare, but, you know, like Ariel says sometimes, like, you know, the government, you know, but they happen to always be there when the event happens and to like whisk it away and quarantine it or whatever they're doing. Yep. And obviously there has to be technology guiding them, but there seems to be maybe they're almost like they're given like that prep time. Maybe I don't know if it's on purpose or not. It's interesting.
100%. I've thought about that too. It's like, how convenient, you know, you're always sort of right there. You've got rapid response, which suggests not only that the technology or whatever exists to track these things, but also there's protocols in place.
Yes.
They have protocols for these things. Yeah. And it's like, well, you only have a protocol for something if there's something to have a protocol for. You know, and my guess, I'd bet a buffalo nickel that after, like, when you look at Roswell, and that was a completely botched response, right? The entire workflow, the mechanics of it was completely botched. They first reported something that they'd gotten a flying saucer and kind of all the things. So I think what we saw in Shag Harbor and so many other cases like it was sort of a SOP, standard operating procedure, that whatever defense branch is running all of this has with this, and in coordination, it showed that this case was that response, that workflow was in coordination with another nation. Skinny brought up Five Eyes, so it would make sense. The United States, Canada are very close, but they were obviously collaborating. And I think the Soviet element is also interesting because were they observing? Were they there almost in a supportive capacity in respects to this during the Cold War? I mean, we'll probably will never know, but that makes it a very interesting case to dissect, as well as, again, more of the elements of water being involved, and these objects, the transmedium capabilities, and sort of all the things, which it seems, I don't know if it's because Tim Gallaudet has come out and Dolan's writing his book, but it seems right now that water and USOs are a big sort of hot topic. So the case is super fascinating.
Were there any specific investigators that kind of caught wind of it and went down to interview witnesses or anything like that?
Yeah, they're not any of like the big names sort of that we would all be able to know or understand. It seemed like this was more based on like what I learned, that this case, cracking it, was more incremental and exponential versus like somebody just went in, did all this research, broke the case open, and here you go. It seemed like it was more bits and pieces, like a recipe to bake a cake.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So that's my take on that. And I think going back even to, we always think about physical trace evidence. So it's like going back to even like, what was this yellow foam? Were there samples of it collected?
Right.
Did the Navies encounter it or the Coast Guards encounter it? Were there samples collected? If so, what was like the chemical breakdown or makeup? What like, was this some type of reaction with the water? Was it something being expelled from the object? Was it something else entirely? I'd be super interested in seeing that. And unfortunately, with a lot of this stuff, it's like, it's all, sort of, you could try to access it with FOIA, but people don't even know where to start. And I think, this was technically in Canadian waters. So it would be interesting to know, I didn't get this deep, but, if it was a U.S. vessel that went to the area in Canadian waters, can you FOIA that? Right? Like the logs, like I wouldn't know. Yeah.
Good point.
So, yeah.
Bob, it was a single fishing boat, right, that reported the yellow foam, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it wasn't corroborated in that sense, but it also sounds like it was sort of fleeting or transient, like the foam wasn't there forever. It sort of dissipated.
Right.
And I'm just like, it had to have either been some type of interaction between the object or whatever it was and encountering the water and sort of a byproduct of it, or perhaps like the object was damaged in some way, shape, or form, and it was leaking, or that was some type of element from the object itself. Either way, in terms of like hard science, it'd just be like fascinating to get a chemical analysis of that.
Yeah.
You could nerd out on it.
Totally.
Is there any like any like weirder lore that kind of goes along with it? Like, oh, an eyewitness reported seeing like a shadowy figure that night. Like, is there anything? I mean, totally kind of off the wall, but I'm just curious, these things tend to have some weirder lore that kind of go along with them. Did you encounter that at all?
Yes. So I encountered, there was some gossip, right, if you will, or lore that beings were observed like outside of the object craft.
Now, was it just a light, or I think you said it did look like one object? Can you describe what people described, and also talk about the aliens or the beings?
Yes. Yeah. So what I read, it was as it was ported on, was more of like your kind of oval shaped object, and in terms of like the beings, I didn't read anything that it was like they could identify like specific features or characteristics like you would see like, oh, it looked like a gray or whatever. Just that like divers had sort of gone down and seen what looked like beings outside of the object and some type of repair or whatever they're doing, which is also very interesting because this happened in the winter. I can't remember the exact month, but Nova Scotia is pretty far north.
Cold, right?
Those waters are going to be pretty cold. And not only that, but they're going to be even colder at a certain depth. So it really makes you wonder, like, okay, so are these beings like themselves immune to like the forces of like not just atmospheric but underwater forces? Did they have like suits that they could use? Are those suits actual like textiles and mechanical suits, or is it something else? If of course like the reports are true and the lore is true and like the beings or whatever we're seeing.
Yeah. And Bob, there was no, when you think about similar or somewhat similar incidents, like I keep referencing Kecksburg, right? They said Kecksburg, I think, the government made a statement that it was maybe like a Soviet satellite, maybe it was a meteor, right? But we know with Roswell, it was a balloon, right? There was always like an explanation of what it was. They know it wasn't a plane. I mean, they couldn't stand on that. But like what I remember reading into this was that unlike those incidents like Kecksburg or Roswell, there was no official kind of diagnosis of what it was a satellite that went down, right? Like it remained unknown to this day, right?
Oh wow.
Yeah.
Which if the shoe fits, right? I mean, that's like exactly what militaries or whoever's hiding this would want is just looks like we can just kind of sweep this one under the rug. Nobody's really asking about it anymore.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the ideal sort of narrative. So that's a good call out, Skinny.
And that was right before we went to the moon, right? We go to the moon.
Yeah.
2 years.
So just thinking of like the Russians or like you said, the Soviet, just tying in some of these pieces of what's happening in society and what they know and what they're seeing. And it is really interesting.
It is. Yeah. There was so much going on at that time. in terms of like, yeah, all of that. There was the space race, Vietnam was going, or at least starting. Of course, like the Cold War, like all the things, and then the technology, of course, that's emerging, satellites and sonar acoustic capabilities. All of that was coming together, and I think too, like there had been other crash sort of incidents, right? Like Skinny keeps bringing up Kecksburg, but it makes sense because I think Kecksburg was what, 65 or something like that.
Yeah.
So that was somewhat recent, but none, at least that I know of through that time, or very many that you can think about that I could think of off the top of my head that specifically involved a crash in water, if you will, in that way, and then potential or lore of like some type of repair.
Right.
And then vacating like the area. It's just it's very unique case just in that sense. If you look at it through those lenses,
really interesting. What about the Canadian government? Do they like, how do they handle it? Are they pretty much the same way, you know, as we've been handling it?
It seems as though I didn't read anything or come across anything that the Canadians were any more open or transparent than we were, or we are. And this sounds like I'm minimizing, you know, Canada, but it's like, I think in a lot of those ways, like they're just an extension of the United States.
Right.
You know, sort of the United States runs the show, operates the mechanics of like the crash retrieval program, and has all the technology to track, you know, objects, whatever, coming from space into atmosphere, NORAD, all the things. And you can see that with, what was that, the February 2023, you know, balloons, you know, that were, you know, encountered, you know, like, and we shot missiles at them or whatever else. The one thing I can say is that it does seem as though the Canadians are less, I would say, programmatic in terms of like the resistance of, you know, investigative efforts from like private. Now, is that because they outsource to the United States and just kind of, it's a deferment policy? I'm not sure, but again, it seems like they're just kind of an extension.
What do you guys think about the idea? And I think, I mean, I could be totally off base, but I'm pretty sure I've heard this concept of you know, maybe they're gifting us with technology. So like this foam, could it have been something, you know, I mean, I don't know. I'm just curious. I mean, obviously we don't know, but is there something to that?
Could maybe be. If I put on my speculation hat, right, and I'm, you know, full transparency, I'm a big follower of Lou Elizondo, right, and I read his book, Eminent, and just I've probably seen all of his every podcast and interview he's ever done. He did something recently with Jesse Michaels of American Alchemy. And he was talking about his or ATIP's theory that the crafts themselves like shed layers, right? Which is why, like, you know, I think it was like the Ubatuba, right, in Brazil, when they got that material. So like, I think my personal opinion would be that with the yellow foam, that has something to do with that, right? The shedding of the material, again, all speculation, right? But shedding of the material, some kind, like Bob said, interaction with the seawater, and it created the yellow foam. As far as the gifting thing goes, I mean, it's super interesting, right? Because like we've all heard, everybody in this quote unquote room has all heard that like crafts have been recovered like totally intact, and it almost looked like they just landed it and was like, all right, well, we got a better one, you know, up the road, you know, we'll just leave it here, you know. So it's interesting there. I think with Shag Harbor though, like, you know, as far as we know, they didn't find anything. So I think it's more likely that was some kind of distress incident, and it was more of like a proverbial crash reaction. Again, speculation, right? Like
that's the understanding that I have as well. Like, unlike so many other incidents, there was nothing that I read or saw where like an object was retrieved, put on on a Navy vessel, covered in by a tarp, that type of thing. It does appear that something came in from outside our atmosphere, went through the atmosphere, and there were lights reported days before, but this specific object went into the water, was down there for some time, joined by another object at some point, with some potential element of beings being sighted, and then both objects vacated the Nova Scotia shore, and off they went. So, and I would agree with Skinny, just in the sense of like, and as well as you, Krys, like the gifting element is, if that's true, it's almost counter intuitive to like, why would you gift technology but at the same time be so elusive and sheepish in terms of like everything else that you're doing? So if you are the NHI, you're going to give technology which is essentially interfering with our evolution and advancement, but then you're not going to like do anything to confirm your existence else, like otherwise. It just seems very strange.
It is,
but I've read the same things, and in Lou's book and other podcasts and other books, that it's like some of these appear to be they just left them.
Fascinating.
Which is just like, what? So I don't know.
It's really interesting to think about. The whole thing's interesting, and the concept of like the balloons in February of 2023, like I really resonate with that, because most of the things I saw were like white spheres, and I recorded during the day, but they all, like, one of the things I've wondered about is this whole idea of the low atmosphere. Like, was there really a switch that, because it makes sense to me, because my sightings were in 2022 during the day. February, by the way, started for a couple of years. And then it's like that switch, was it like only fast moving objects at a certain level of atmosphere were being tracked? And then suddenly when they turn that switch down, they're going to peak. Because I feel like the objects, they were so consistent, and I saw them daily and at a lower atmosphere, recorded them. I'm like, how? And it was over military bases, over in San Diego. So how did we not see these? How are we not doing this until that balloon incident happened? And I really think there could have been a switch that was turned off, that they weren't observing slower, lower atmosphere objects.
Oh, 100%.
Definitely.
We always talk about, some of the capabilities of UAPs and the speed. And it's really easy to forget that following like our current technology and how we're able to fly requires a certain velocity to create lift. And something that's, moving whatever, 80 miles an hour, oftentimes like against the jet stream or even stationary.
Good point.
It's I don't know. I look at those three objects, and I think that they weren't detecting those things, nor was not detecting them. I think they calibrated, or like you said, flipped a switch, started detecting them. And I think my theory is this was a little bit of almost like a Roswell thing, where the workflow or typical protocol that would be in place to be like, let's not announce these things, publicize these things, send jets after them, that didn't get to the right sort of people. So they started scrambling, because if you notice, after those three events, now there's nothing again.
I know. I am so like it actually reconfirmed like my sightings in a way, because it was like, how can it make sense that I'm seeing these things every day at 311, 411? They're slow moving. They go against wind. They light up. And nobody's noticing. I'm in San Diego, right by Miramar,
Wow.
And then, I moved shortly after February of 2023, so I don't know if they're still, appearing regularly or not. But it made so much sense to me, because when I saw the images of the balloons, I'm like, that's what the thing I'm looking at looks like in distance with your eye or, you know, with glasses. So yeah, it just resonated so much with me that the technology that we're observing with or whatever, like somebody just kind of blew it off and said, we don't need to look at low atmosphere. We're just looking up, you know, higher at faster speeds. And that's how they got away with infiltrating.
I totally think you're right. I think if you think about it, NORAD is intended to look for like ballistic missiles, right? ICBMs and stuff like that. So it's
also fascinating too, like what happened after that, because I remember at that time hearing that this was the first shoot down of an object, air-to-air shoot down of an object over the United States,
right?
You know, and it's like there was never any explanation really given. We've seen no pictures. We've been given no data. Just nothing.
And then the initial reports of the one that they're not showing us, right? They showed us the balloon. Why did they show us that one, the Chinese balloon or whatever? Why did they show proud and brag about that, and then ignore the other ones? And those pilots said they didn't see, like, it was the size of a car, it was a cube. I mean, those were the initial reports anyway. But nothing has come out about that. And that one is to me like one of the most fascinating stories that has not been unveiled.
Totally 100% agree with you. It's contemporary, it's mysterious, all the way. We could do a whole episode on those.
No kidding. So good. So switching gears to some current events, lots of stuff going on right now. There's going to be another congressional hearing coming up in November. What are you guys hoping to, possibly see come from that?
Well, Corbell has said that, I mean, he's a little bit of a hype man, but he said that we all know this, but he said that the hearing is supposed to be explosive. And he said that Immaculate Constellation, I think, is probably going to come up, and I hope that it does. And I also hope, I've heard there's supposed to be new witnesses, right? And Nancy Mace herself, she is chairing it, she's leading it, and she has said, I think she said, if you guys know Askapol, Matt Laszlo, I think it was, he got her, and she said that something to the effect of wanting to talk to people that have,
hat sighting.
Yeah, that had actually like touched the shit, I think was like her.
Shit. She's going. Yeah.
I mean, which is great. So that's basically what I'm looking to or hoping to see.
Yeah. I'm looking for more, right? We know that the evidence is going to continue to be circumstantial. So I'm looking for more highly credible corroboration. And I'm looking for more publication and syndication. I think the more people that get even partially plugged into this and start asking more questions, that creates the groundswell that we need to get more done. So it's like, it's the syndication piece that is like really, really key for me. And credit to like your news nations and whatnot, because they cover this stuff, right? Like, you don't really see it on some of the, like, at least with any depth or scope or nuance, any of the sort of major outlets. So they continue to push this, or rather, so News Nation continues to push this and cover it and syndicate it. And again, I just think like I'm really looking for groundswell. For me, and I'm sure everyone on this call, we're way more plugged in. I would love to see like much more cohesion in terms of like things that connect other things that we learn. But will we see that? I don't know. But I really want to see the syndication.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's huge. And on a kind of weird side note, one way we could get that is through, I don't know how you guys feel about her, but Taylor Swift. So I heard a rumor that I don't know if this is true, that Kelsey Travis's father was either a MUFON director or a MUFON member.
Are you serious?
That's what I just heard. It could be a total rumor. It's a Twitter rumor. And that's why she's wearing her UFO outfits and doing her UFO thing on stage, that supposedly they're really tied into the topic. And I'm telling you, that's just publication we could use.
Oh, are you 100%? She has a huge outreach, and it's with probably not your like typical demographics that are going to be really like tuned and plugged into this stuff. So if she gets involved in this dialogue in any way, shape, or form,
we'll get some ladies.
Oh yeah, 100%. Like, and of course, you know, the phenomena is dominated by, of course, like too much so, but most of the researchers are men, right? So like, I think that would be an added benefit, is like, yeah, you're reaching a different audience, a different demographic from somebody who's very influential. I would love that type of publication.
Yeah, I heard that the other day. And my kids, my girls are Swifties, and we went to the Taylor Swift concert here in Arizona a couple years ago. The first one, well, it was the second concert. But of course now they're engaged. When they see her posting stuff or whatever, they're sending it to me, and
and you're like,
credibility. It's like, wait, I'm your mom.
I know.
You're with me all the time. But when she adds the voice, it's suddenly important, you know.
It gives it much more gravity for those types of listeners, and I think the more those generations move through, like I was talking about this, I think I was going back and forth with someone on Reddit, and there's a generational change in terms of how people approach this. Like the older generations, you know, that's like, especially going post World War II, were more, there was more, I think, trust and faith coming out of World War II in, you know, military and the institution of government, right? So if they said something, it's like, okay, that's kind of changed. Whereas generations to come, more and more so, ask the hard questions, ask why, don't take everything just fed. And I think, again, if Taylor Swift can plug into that, some of those younger demographics, that would be huge for us.
Yeah,
huge.
I'll
take it.
I'll say this as like maybe a punctuation. It's an interesting time, right? You had Elizondo's book come out at the end of August. September was relatively quiet, but like, look at October. You had the revelation of Immaculate Constellation. George Knapp has a documentary coming out in November. James Fox's The Program's coming out in November. You have the hearings that are happening in November. So I think it's an interesting time, and maybe I'm just optimistic, but I hope that we'll get some big news here.
I agree. I think I do think, or believe, I don't know, I don't think like all of this sort of happening in terms of syndication right now is just arbitrarily so.
I think it's planned already.
I think there's coordination. There's coordination, and then
absolutely.
Is that in support of the hearings? Is there something else? Like I'm not sure, but I completely agree. It's like, I don't think it's just coincidence. Like there's no way.
No, and Kelly.
Well, there's always going to be, like if you look at like templates for crisis management, and you know, one section of crisis management is public awareness campaigns, that you have to bring the public in on what you're doing before it happens, you know, so they're not like in panic mode. So we could be seeing a very planned out public awareness campaign that's being carried out right now to kind of ease if there is a bomb that's dropped.
Yeah.
That's very logical.
I completely agree. And you know what it was, I think it was Lou had said, or maybe it was Chris Mellon, but like, you know, disclosure is it's not an event, it's a process.
Yeah.
And I think what I know about process, any type of evolution, growth, it's always sort of 2 steps forward, 1 step back, right? It's never just straight, sort of linear. And I think this is probably, it looks like it's a push for 2 steps forward. And I do think we need it. There's a lot of cynicism out there. I know that I was listening again. I think that was the Need to Know podcast, and Cold Heart and Dolan are not optimistic about disclosure ever happening. But Dolan said something, and I was like, yeah, it's a good point. He's like, right now, in terms of what's happening with all the publicity, the media, the books, and then also the congressional support, is like, it's the best. I think he said it's the best offense that disclosure has ever had. And I'm here for it. I'll take it.
I know we have to wrap up soon, but one question I'm curious about is, do you, I hope I don't forget my question. I hate when my brain does this. Do you guys feel that there is something imminent coming? Like, not from the government, not like, do you think NHI, do you feel something is imminent?
I think Lou Elizondo thinks something is. It was the same interview with Jesse Michaels, and he was asked, like, what's with the book title?
Right.
And he's like, I feel like you're holding on to something, like there's something you can't tell.
Yeah.
And he just was like looking down. He's like, time is a luxury we do not have. So I don't know what that means. I don't necessarily know that that's NHI. There's going to be something there, but I do think that there is, the clock is ticking to what I'm not sure. Reason. Yep.
Yeah, I agree. To answer the question, I think there's something. I was actually just discussing this with my wife the other day. It could very well be, and you look at Lou, he's coming from intelligence, and it could very well be that the Chinese or another nation is planning to disclose.
Right.
And that would not be good for the United States, right? If they did that first. Yeah. So it could be that. But at the same time, like, if the objects and the NHI are able to move and operate in the way that they operate, then time isn't what we think it is. And perhaps there is advanced knowledge from someone like Lou or whoever that, yes, there is an imminent event involving them.
Robert
happening.
Salas. I mean, he's not the only one that
Ramirez has said something from the CIA. I mean, so I'm very open-minded. I do think that something is happening. Something is coming.
Yeah. Interesting.
Well, this was so much fun, guys. I really hope that, honestly, I would love to do this again. Bring you guys on and have a conversation, and we could maybe sometime get into theories, Jacques Vallée's theory, interdimensional, crypto-terrestrial. I mean, that would be fun, to do that. Anyway, we'll coordinate something, but thank you so much for coming on. Tell us where our followers can find you guys at.
You can find us we have an Instagram page. A lot of the Shag Harbor kind of template, a lot of dives into specific incidents and events, as well as a podcast that we have hosted on Spotify. And it's
called Skinny and Bob.
Sorry. I want you to repeat it, but send me the links to those if you don't mind, so that I can just,
sure.
You might have already done that, but
so we can put them in the show notes.
We can do that.
I'll send you it. I'll send you the links. The Instagram, we cover cases, break them down, and then I think we link directly to our audio podcast on there as well. So I agree, this has been awesome. I so enjoy these types of abstract kind of conversations on this topic. It totally gets me going. Would love to come back, chat with you guys anytime.
Yeah. Thank you guys so much. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having us. Really appreciate it.
Thank
you.
I'm gonna